Hi again. For this video we're going to be continuing work on the robotic arm of the Razorback, and as reference material I've opened up a file here of a different robotic arm that I've made. This was originally a tutorial for a 3D magazine, and I later turned it into a sort of animation and rendering study, did a little bit of rigging. So let's take a look at what I have here and how it pertains to what we're going to be doing with the Razorback. The structure of this arm is very similar to the one that is going to be on the Razorback. We have a main arm, a secondary part of the arm, and then a tool at the end that sort of, in this case, has a welder or a cutter. And there's sort of a cable that runs through the entire arm that feeds, whether it's a welding rod or a gas, I'm not really sure. So this arm has a pretty interesting aspect to it, which is this tool on the end. Notice that the tool is offset, which means that I can rotate the tool around and it really changes its position. Just to demonstrate, if I were to bring the tool up here, I could then select the tool. Let me see if it'll let me rotate it. Yeah, we can rotate it around this way, which means I can reach something over here. And then we can rotate it around the other way, which means I can reach something over there, all the while not moving the main part of the arm. This is important because on our Razorback, we're going to have a situation where the blade is going to be mounted to something at the end of the arm, and we're going to need to make subtle movements, maybe up, down, and around, to be able to click into these blades. So what I'm thinking is that if we can get this arm just to get to the center point right here, or maybe a little bit lower, a little bit higher, maybe a tool at the end of the arm can then rotate position 1, 2, 3 to pick up one of the blades. That's my hope. But that's not what we're going to be focusing on right now. I think right now we should focus a little bit more on how this area of the arms works and just start sort of fleshing that out. So if this is going to be our servo, or our main base rather, let's see how big we can make it. So if we rotate this back down to a banking angle of 0, we get it straight, plumb, and we can see how much space we have available to work with. Now we already know that at this scale we could reach a wall in front of us, so I'm just going to delete that object. I'm also going to do some renaming. Let's call this arms symmetry. Let's call this symmetry group. Let's call this one arm base. Let's call this large arm, small arm, and then blade instance. That's fine. So we have something to work with now. Now our arm base is not actually our arm base. At this point it's just an object with a pivot point. It's a cube. It's just a helper object. So I'm going to turn off the symmetry for now, just so we can work and have a little bit of breathing room. Now we can see here that with our pivot point at its current location, let's rotate this out a little bit just to see. It lifts over the arm mounting point quite nicely. Probably go down to 115 degrees. That sounds about right for our range of motion. So if we're going to come down to 115 degrees, and at 0 degrees, we're right here, it looks like we actually have some space below. Which means the first thing we can do is group this arm base. That gives us a nice pivot point, because when you group an object in C4D, it takes either the pivot point of that object or I think a mean of all of the objects. So if you group 5 objects, I think the pivot point is at the center of them all. So this is our pivot point. Let's actually move it out a little bit so we can actually, or would it be on the inside of the frame? Yeah, let's move it down. Let's say we mount on the inside of the frame right there. That means that, oh, got a little disoriented there. Okay, that means that this is our pivot. This is our arm base. We are now free to not care where the center of the arm base is. We can move that object however we want because we've maintained that the pivot point is right here. Now with the lower pivot point, it looks like we actually intersect the blade. So I'm just going to move it back up a little bit. And if we do another rotation test, we can see that we still sort of intersect the blade. Yeah, let's just move this all the way back up to how we had it before. So it's basically on the top edge of the frame. That way when we rotate, we go over and completely clear the blade. That's good. But it does leave us with the interesting proposition that we have a lot more space down here. This means if we were to rotate underneath this object and select that face, we are free to make this a little bit deeper. And that's good for balance, and it's also good for scale, because now the base of our arm can look a little bit more beefy. So let's focus on this pivot point a little bit more. If this is the base of our arm, then we can sort of derive an object from it. Let's use the split command, and that's going to give us a new hierarchy with the object we had selected, with just the polygons we had selected. I don't need the rest of the hierarchy, so I'm going to get rid of it. And this is no longer arm base, this is now pivot. So the pivot geometry sits right here under the pivot point. And its origin, we can probably reset that. So C4D has a tool right there that does that. And we can start modeling. So let's zoom in a little bit and select that face. And let's extrude. Now in this case we want to create caps. So create a slab of an object like that. Good. We also want to select a loop of polygons around the edges and do a normal move. Normal move moves faces along their normals. So in this case, that's good. And we then want to bring it up to its mounting point. So again, I'm just going to keep the modeling of this really simple because I don't know how much of this we're actually going to see in the final product. So if I control drag to pull that out and then scale it in a little bit and then control drag a little bit more, we can see that it's now sort of looking a little bit more like a bracket. I'm going to remove the smoothing tag from it. You can always add that later. And something looks strange about this object. Yeah, there we go. Looks like it got scaled incorrectly. So it looks like my scale tool is in world mode. Change it back to local and I can scale it properly. That's why our smoothing looked funny. So now that our scale tool is behaving the way we want, we can maybe move it a little bit forward, extrude it out again, and we do another test rotation. We're going to be doing a lot of test rotations. So that doesn't work. It sort of intersects a little bit and it doesn't actually meet the pivot point. Actually, no, that does work. That's what we want. Let's move that up a little bit, extrude one more time, and just so we can see our pivot, I'm going to change its display from a dot to an axis. Or star. No, let's see. What have we got here? We have all these shapes. Axis, cube, pyramid, sphere. Let's go with a sphere. Let's reduce its radius a little bit, so that's our pivot point. It's more of a circle if you ask me, but anyway. So we can now see that it's right here, and we can model to go and meet it. So if our pivot point is, let's see, perpendicular like that, it's right here actually. So we're right about along the axis of where it is. If we move to the front view, you can see we're also right where it is in that perspective, and we can leave it like that. That's all it needs to be right now, because we're not really sure how the rest of it is going to work. We just know that it needs to be some sort of a pivot. So I'm going to save the file, and we can do another test rotation to say okay. So in this case we can see how our pivot looks. It doesn't really work right there, it intersects too much. So let's go to edge mode and move that edge in a little bit just to round it off. And then we can go to point mode, select all the points involved, deselect this point right here, and let's see what needs to happen here. Well, it looks like in its folded position this needs to not be so far out, but in its extended position it looks like it's okay. So let's make a few tweaks to this. Again, you can tell this is all very scientific. Not really. And just sort of modeling right off the top of my head. Okay, so let's say that was fine. Let's do another test rotation, see what that looks like. We can rotate this up and over, and it's looking a lot better. A lot better. Just to sort of make it a little bit more believable for now, believable being a very loose term at this point, let's move a cylinder to the location of this object, scale it down. We only need about 12 rotation segments on it. Actually, let's go lower. We only need 8. And let's change its orientation to Z. We can then move it to where the pivot point is. Now I'm actually thinking maybe I should transfer the coordinates of this object to the actual pivot null. There we go. Stretch it out a little bit, make its radius a little bit smaller. And like that's technically our pivot right there. So however we want to model this in the future, this is a good starting point because this shows where the actual pivoting is happening. So let's move that as a child of the pivot object right there. And the next time we articulate this pivot, we should be moving right along that. There we go. So you can sort of see the iterative modeling process I'm doing here, where I'm just saying, okay, well this object needs to move like this, and this other object needs to move like that without hitting it, so I guess that's where it lives. I mean, I can already see that these blades are going to have to shift backwards a little bit, because this first blade is a little bit too close to our goal. Let's see. So this would be blade instance. I'm just going to go to the side view to adjust this. So these blades would come backwards a little bit, maybe arc up a little bit more. And then if we go to the top view, we can see what sort of damage we've done in the alignment department here. Yeah, it looks like they need to come inwards a little bit more. Maybe rotate like that. The basic idea is they're not allowed to intersect with any of the geometry we're creating right now. So if that means all of the blades need to sort of shuffle down a little bit, then so be it. We can fix this. We can make a jig that holds the blades. We can change the rotation of the blades as I'm doing right now. Nothing is set in stone at this point. Alright, so that looks pretty cool. I like how the blade layout has changed. It hasn't changed for the worse. And we have a skyward arm, looking kind of silly. So we now have a better idea of how this lower arm is going to pivot. Let's start roughing out this geometry a little bit. So, one of the things we're going to need to do is create pivot points, and right now the pivot points are the cubes. I don't want the pivot points to be the cubes, because we run into that same situation we've discussed in the previous screencast, where If my pivot point is the cube, then that means I'm modifying the geometry of my pivot point, which is less than desirable, because if I wanted to swap the geometry out, I'd need to swap the pivot point out with it as well. So I've overcome that right here with this pivot object, in that this geometry is not really related to the pivot, but the arm base is still where the pivot point is. And we can see here the pivot point is wrong. The arm, sorry, not the arm base. The arm base is fine. The large arm. The pivot point here is correct. So this is where we might have a motor, again, coming off at a strange angle to replicate what we're doing down here with the servos. And yeah, so this is where the arm would be. So the easiest way to create a new pivot point is just to group it. We just created another null object, and now we have a large arm as a child. We can do the same thing with the small arm, just group it. We have another pivot point. Its child is now some geometry. And the blade instance, we're going to leave that alone for now. We're not ready for that. So the first thing we want to do for the arm base is to sort of replicate what I have going on in this other project, where the base of the arm is a little bit fatter, and it comes up to meet the pivot point of the main arm. So I'm just going to switch back to the Razorback, and we can sort of move it up here, scale it in so it tapers a little bit, scale it down. Now, because we know the large arm's pivot is correct, we can create another cylinder and transfer the position of the cylinder to the large arm. We now have a cylinder that is locked with the large arm, at least in its current state, but it's at the wrong orientation. So just going to change this to orientation X, and we now have a pretty good idea of where our pivot point is. This means we can go back to the arm base, and we can start doing a little bit of modeling to smooth it out. Now, I'm not going to do too much modeling, just because, again, I'm not really sure what this is going to look like when we're done with it. But we can start to say, okay, so this arm is going to look like this, roughly. And we can even use the knife tool, and we can say, okay, let's say this arm was sliced at an angle like that. We could then come in here, and here's a little bit of a trick. I want to sort of lop this part of the arm off so it has a recess, but just moving this doesn't do that, because now I have a slope here. The fix for that is actually to disconnect these polygons, do that operation, and then reconnect everything. So if I select this group of polygons up here and I use the disconnect command, I say preserve groups, it means all of these are going to stick together. We now have a separate object, or a separate group of polys. We can then move this part inwards the way we want, and then reconnect things. But before we can reconnect things, we need somewhere for this geometry to go. So typically what I would do, just the quick and dirty solution, is I would use the knife tool in loop mode. So we can tap the shift key and it locks. That way we can numerically adjust where the cut is. And let's just put the cut right there. We slice it. So now our geometry all lines up again. So we can now select all and do pretty much the reverse of disconnect, which is optimize. And the points that stayed at the same location, like these, are now joined again. However, I'm not so sure about these points because they weren't dead on top of each other. To fix that, we can just select these points and do MQ, which is the weld command. So we select these points, we say weld, we just weld them together. What we're left with right now is an object that is just fine and dandy, but it has a hole in it. So we can use the close polygon hole tool to fill that. So we're starting to see how the geometry of our arm base is coming along. And we see we have a cylinder here. Let's move it down to 8 segments. Nice reminder that this is the low poly geometry and we need to work on it. And because this part of the arm is going to be swinging outwards and there's going to be another arm right here, we're going to have to be creative with this motor. But for now, I'm just going to leave it right there. Oh, by the way, yeah, that cylinder should be a motor, I think. I'm not into robotics as much as I'd like to be, but I'm pretty sure you need a motor to actuate an arm like this because it's not hydraulic. And then we'd move this part of the secondary arm into that recess we created. Now that we have our secondary arm, we can start making it into a rough object. So the large arm object, and we just select a couple of the edges here and we say bevel, and I'm just going to bevel it slightly like that. So now that arm has a curved end as well. Brilliant. And I think we can probably get away with a little bit of a scale here. So let's make a cut there, get some extra geometry, select all of these faces, all of these edges rather, and scale it up only along the view plane, which is right now the YZ. That way the X stays the same. So we can scale it up like that, but it doesn't make it any wider. So that looks pretty good. And then just to save weight and to sort of make the arm look a little bit more nimble, we're going to scale down this part much smaller. And we're also going to replicate the cylinder that we had here. So to do that, we can just select the cylinder, copy it into the large arm hierarchy. And we know the large arms, sorry, not the large arm, the small arm. So we know the small arm center is here, so we know that if we take the cylinder and say your position should be 0, 0, 0, it's going to go there. And scale it down so it sort of fits. And we can start to model the small arm a little bit. Another thing we see is that the large arm isn't long enough. It sort of crops off the cylinder. So we can stretch it out so it's a little larger. We can then go to our small arm. Again, I'm moving really quick on this because I don't want to make this video longer than it has to be. Haven't gotten much feedback on the videos thus far, so I'm not sure if people are actually watching them all the way through or if they're just browsing. Attention span is a hell of a thing, and I want to make sure I don't abuse that. Okay, so we have our arm here. I do notice that we're not square all the way along, but well, maybe we are. Maybe I'm just not seeing it. So let's make a cut right there. And we can use our same primitive rounding technique. So we just select the edges there, choose our bevel tool, and bevel it. And now we can do the same thing to the large arm. We just select our edges, bevel it. So now our small arm and our large arm are linked with each other right here. And we kind of get the idea. We see the direction we're going in. And so the second part of this long arm is really, really long. I'm just looking at it. So, well, compared to the base. And let's see, how does this work? If we were to select this null object and scale, we can make that part a little bit bigger. And if we were to select this null object and scale, we can make that part a little smaller. I like that. So there's another advantage to having the null objects. You can sort of cascade your changes pretty easily. And again, we want the arms to look pretty nimble. So we're just going to select the end of this arm, scale it down a little bit more. Not too much though, because we want it to still seem robust. Now, just like we looked at the firefall and the District 9 reference material, and we saw the cylinders coming out at a strange angle, I think we can do that again for these arms. So one example would be this cylinder. Typically on an industrial robot, at least the ones I've seen, this motor is right here. It's sort of sticking out. It's usually the same size as the casing, like that, and it drives the arm. There's probably a gearbox in there as well. But this may not work for us because our pivot is going to bring our arm all the way out like that, and that motor is just too big and unwieldy, and it's just in the wrong spot. Maybe we can fix that by taking a little bit more artistic license and saying, well, what if there was sort of an angled gearbox, and what if this cylinder can actually be, let's rotate it 90 degrees, put it up here, and let's see, what if it was rotated like that, and then sort of off center like that. This would serve to sort of convince the viewer that, okay, these arms are a lot smaller than the ones you're used to. The motor here is a lot smaller. You can see it's probably some sort of a lightweight gearbox integrated with it. And if we make it intersect, we can mate it a lot better there later on. But the idea is that the motor can look like this. Just to sell the idea a little bit more, I'm going to create a duplicate of the cylinder, scale it down into sort of a reduction mechanism that sits right there. So I'm just creating some blocked geometry to see what it would look like. And hey, that could be our motor that drives this part of the robot's arm. Likewise, for the small arm here, we can take that same artistic license and we can say, okay, if we center it on the pivot, so it's 0, 0, 0, XYZ, and then rotate it 90 degrees. Now, I think it's important to center it first before rotating it, because if this motor was going to be at a strange angle doing its job, I think it would need to be radial, meaning it would need to line up with the center pivot somehow. I think it would be more tricky to have it off center. And then we can sort of have something similar for the smaller arm, although it would probably be less necessary for the smaller arm. So maybe we stick with convention for the smaller arm, meaning we scale this up a little bit, make it not as long, so it's a little bit more squat, and the motor for the smaller arm simply, well, see, we can't put it on this side because it'll intersect with our robot's other arm. So instead, maybe we can put it over here, a little bit more squat, sort of like that, and that's our motor that actuates this part of the arm. It doesn't look as cool as this one here that comes off at an angle. And then we'll tackle this other part here in a different video, I think. Again, I'm trying to keep these short. So if we were to look at the display, quick shading lines, and we say, okay, let's take our small arm, rotate it down. Let's take our blade, rotate it back, and our large arm, rotate it down. We could say, okay, maybe this is how the machine sits at rest. So it all sort of folds up, or maybe if we pivot this out, maybe it would actually rest at the 115 degrees we previously discussed. So it's ready at a moment's notice to sort of, let's see if I can do this. If I select all three of these objects and use the chord tab, could I adjust the pitch of all of them at the same time? No, they have slightly different coordinate systems. Yeah, but the idea is that the main arm would spring out like this. The secondary arm would provide some sort of leverage. And then the third part of the arm that holds the blade would be able to quickly actuate it. So you'd be able to sort of animate a sweeping motion forward as this part extends and sort of do like a slicing maneuver. Not dissimilar to like what a samurai would do, I guess. Sort of run at the target while moving its blade slightly. So let's just say for now, for style's sake, the blade is stored like that. Maybe. Not really committing to that. So if we rotate this bad boy back in, and then turn the symmetry object on again, we'll see how we'll look if we have two of these. So we got these Johnny 5 looking eyes. And then when the arms rotate outwards, they can do so together. And that sort of saves us from the idea of center of gravity and balance. Even though, like I said, it shouldn't be a problem for a robot, but in this case it might be. And then the arms could then extend. And so that's what I'm thinking. As usual, I hope you enjoyed this screencast. I hope you come back for more. And if you're interested in this at all, leave me a comment. I'd love to know what you think of my progress. And if you think this is a silly project, let me know. If you think it's an awesome project, let me know too. I can sort of fuel my my inspiration off of both of those. I take bad criticism, I think, just as well as good. So let me know if you like it. Let me know how I'm doing. If you have any ideas, I would be happy to implement them. And until next time, have a good one.